Well, it's time now to see what's making the headlines with the director of the Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Financial Times pictures floral tributes for the 19 children killed in a school shooting in Texas, as police there face growing anger over their response to the attack. The Telegraph says a Conservative MP's son is fighting with Ukrainian soldiers and helped save a fellow Briton maimed by a landmine. The Guardian reports on the Prime Minister's changes to the ministerial code, which mean ministers won't need to resign if caught breaking rules. Triggering accusations, the changes were made to protect his job ahead of a new Partygate inquiry. The Mirror has word of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee plans, set to include Prince Charles, Prince William and Prince George, with the paper calling heirs to the future. The Express says families setting off for half-term holidays face chaos at airports today and are set for worse this summer due to staff shortages. And The Star has the same story on its front page. And reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by the director of the Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the FT Weekend, their front page, and having a look at the awful story in Texas, the shooting the Robb Elementary School. Today we've been having responses from those that responded, i.e. the police, and actually just putting their hands up and said they got it awfully wrong. Alex.
That's right. And may I make the first point? This is the only appearance of this story on any of the front pages that we've seen for tomorrow. How swiftly it seems we move on from these tragedies in the United States, perhaps because, lamentably, they happen so often. As you say, the police have completely conceded that they got this terribly wrong with regard to this school. And what they did was to arrive at the scene, circle the school, prevent anyone else going in, and then let the shooter go ahead killing people to his heart's content. I mean, I know that the police do an incredibly hard job in their country as well as ours, perhaps given the plethora of guns on the streets and in people's hands, an even harder job than the police here in the United Kingdom. But I don't think it took a genius to work out that they took the wrong approach on this.
Yes, Polly?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking to read the timeline. You know, you've got one on the Sky website, everywhere. You go through what the police have set out. And they just waited while a child in that classroom was calling 911, telling them, updating them what was happening, asking for help. And help was there. It was just the other side of the door. And that's just extraordinary to me and devastating. And, you know, I think it's very difficult for us in the United Kingdom to understand the debate and the culture around this in the United States, because we just don't have the same discourse about guns. This is a problem that only happens in America. There are violent, angry teenagers in every country in the world, but it's only in America that school shootings, mass public shootings happen, you know, regularly. It's only within this month that we were talking about a shooting at a convenience store. And it's because anybody pretty much can get hold of an assault rifle. And to read one of these stories and not feel that urgent, desperate need to do something that could have stopped this, regardless of the police failing, something that would have stopped this angry young man getting hold of those 2 assault rifles and 1,600 rounds of ammunition he took into that school. It's, you know, and if the US is going to have a gun culture like that, the story they tell is it's fine because we need good guys with guns as well. But, you know, in this example, the good guys with the guns were useless. I think it's a reminder that that idea that if you just arm everybody, you can prevent shootings is just self-evidently not true.
Let's move on to The Guardian. Completely different story, as you said. That was the only paper that has the shootings in Texas on the front page. But let's move to the Guardian. And this is to do with the Prime Minister. The accusation is that he's changing the code to protect his position as he's facing another inquiry, Alex.
Well, of course, it's completely untrue. There is a committee that has produced a report that recommends changes to the way the ministerial code is implemented. And some people have worked themselves up into an absolute froth today over this story because they think that Boris, controls this and has somehow been able to get the former head of MI5 and the Queen's former permanent private secretary to do exactly what he wishes and then to enable him to bend or break the rules.
So you're suggesting it's just bad timing?
Well, no. It is plain that the ministerial code has been under review for some time, and this committee has been looking at what happens with the ministerial code. But the most important thing for people to understand is if you have willfully misled the House of Commons under the change that this code, new code suggests, you still resign. So people who have been seeking to suggest that this is a way for Boris to save his skin and to manipulate things and he's changed the rules are doubly wrong. First of all, it's not the Prime Minister who's changed the rules, or if this goes through. And second of all, under the new rules, if you willfully mislead the House of Commons, you go too. So I mean, as I say, some people, including some very senior Labour politicians who ought to know better, have been saying things online in interviews today which are completely inaccurate.
Polly, is that your take on this?
I think Alex is both completely right and completely wrong. There is a lot of the commentary here is overblown. The changes are relatively small. And this question of kind of saying that ministers don't always have to resign if they've broken the code, they can have other punishments, which lots of people have got very upset about, has always kind of been the principle, and it's codified, and some of these changes have, as Alex says, been recommended by a sort of separate committee. However, I think there is a problem here. One is that the Prime Minister has balked at the idea of actually giving the independent advisor the right to initiate an investigation. The Prime Minister will still essentially have a veto against that. I think that is very unfortunate. And I also think there's, the reality is we have had breaches of the ministerial code in which the Prime Minister has sought no sanction whatsoever. For example, with Priti Patel, who was found to have breached the ministerial code, and the Prime Minister said, oh, well. For me, there's something about the forward, right? So the Prime Minister, most of the ministerial code is extremely boring, legalistic tone. There's a little bit at the beginning, which is, like real prose. And in the Prime Minister's new one, it just sort of says, the code's fine, it's been operating for 30 years. I had the privilege to be involved in writing tiny review of the draft of David Cameron's first ministerial code. And in that, he said, we promised to be different. He said that we had an obligation to be different, to do better than before. And that aspiration to build trust and confidence with high standards of propriety and ethics is something that, unfortunately, I do think is completely absent from this government under Boris Johnson's leadership.
Right. And just to make a summary there of that, do you believe that the new code is a weakening of the system? Just very briefly, yes or no?
At the margins, yes. But the problem is that the Prime Minister is not interested in actually enforcing any rules of conduct or propriety in Downing Street amongst his ministerial team. He's looking for ways to wriggle out of things.
Gillian, I know you're keen.
OK, just come back, Alex, very quickly.
Yeah. I know that perhaps some people would like that to be the conclusion, that this is a dilution of the code, but Polly's strongest point, in my view, is that one about the independent investigators not being able to trigger independent reviews and of his or her own bat. I completely agree with that. But the point is, that's the status quo. Okay. The Prime Minister hasn't changed that at all. So people who are getting worked up about that as well are triply wrong.
Right, just very quickly, we've got time to go to the FT and the cost of living crisis, 15 billion. Boris Johnson claiming that will not feed inflation. Polly?
Well, so part of this is about whether it counts actually as spending or whether it's just a rebate and therefore is sort of discounted against inflation rates in our gas bills. Crucially, it's absolutely essential. If the government is worried about inflation, there are monetary and fiscal policy changes that they could make. And I think it's absolutely essential for families. I was impressed actually by the scale and the ambition and the focus that they unleashed yesterday. And frankly, this is what we should have seen in the spring statement.
In 30 seconds, I'm guessing you're agreeing with that, Alex, as you're nodding your head.
I think it's a great package. I agree with the chief economist from Goldman Sachs, who's quoted on the front of the FT saying this is probably going to avert a recession or mean we have a very mild one. I note that he was, of course, economic advisor to the last chancellor, so he knows a little about that whereof he speaks. I think this is a good package that people in this country really need, and I applaud it.
OK, Alex and Polly, for the moment, thank you. Coming up, the Daily Star says families trying to get away ahead of the summer break have faced chaos on the roads and at the airports. More on that, come back to us.